The big one that is oftentimes quoted is compensation for Coriolis effect while flying. And this is something I'd even taught my students about, and it's always assumed to be correct. We just assume. We're given the narrative from a young age, and everything is built upon that assumption, upon the theory. And so I thought I had the silver bullet. Coriolis effect. We always calculate for that. Well, as I began to look through the books and to look into the calculations given for Coriolis effect, the narrative began to fall apart even further. I began to see things I didn't notice when I was in school, such as Coriolis effect is actually never calculated for, but is assumed to be a part of wind correction angle. Wind correction angle is one of the many calculations pilots of all kinds make while flying to correct against winds in whatever volume or section of air they're flying through, which it could be from any direction, and you're flying through it, so you have to compensate a certain angle into that wind to hold a straight line.
Interesting side note, I worked on aerostats for several years, and I always ask people who try to bring up gravity, well, how come my 4,000 pound, 74,000 cubic foot aerostat isn't getting pushed towards the ground? It weighs more than you do, which you believe gravity is pushing you down, right? Because these are some dense ass people. But how come the aerostat's not getting driven into the ground? It weighs more. It's definitely larger than the size of a house. It's more than size of most houses. So why isn't it getting driven to the ground? Well, that's because it's displacing less weight than the atmosphere or the medium that it's in. And I try explaining that. I don't know how many times you've probably posted something on this. I don't know how many times we're going to have to post something on this. But every time that little kid lets go of that helium balloon and starts crying.
Radar is simply another form of radio transmission. Radio includes anything within the range of the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic spectrum, also known as light. Radio is the transmission of light, whether it's visible light or radio waves which are not visible. When it comes to radio transmissions, there must be a transmitter and a receiver. There can be a reflector or a transmittal unit along the way. However, in the end, there's got to be at least transmitter and a receiver. And in the case of radar, radar transmits a signal and it bounces off a reflector, and then it comes back to the receiving station. Or it can go to other stations if they're set up in the network properly. Long story short, radar emits a signal, it bounces off something, and then it returns to a receiving unit, and the receiving unit maps that reflection accordingly. If there is no reflector, then there's no return signal, and then the object does not show up on the radar. For example, it's off the screen. Notice, there's no curving around anything. It goes out in a straight line. Radio signals always travel in a straight line. So the transmitter sends the signal out to the target, bounces off, and it comes back in a straight line. Radar cannot travel over the curve, and hence, radar is dependent on line of sight, direct beam from the transmission to the target. It reflects and it comes straight back. There is no curving around anything, thus is radar.
Also, radar works in straight lines. The radar is incapable of curving around a curve, picking up and bouncing back the reflection of what it's picking up. So if you can imagine a ship on the other side of the curve, we'll say 30 miles, 40 miles out, it sends out the radar beam. The radar beam is supposedly curving around this ball, bouncing back, and then bouncing the reflection, curving back around to be picked up by the radar. That's not happening. It's flying out straight, and when it picks up something, it hits it back. It's not going around any curve. That's plain and simple. That can be looked up on your YouTube and see how radar waves work. They don't go around the curve. Every diagram shown will show you straight lines. They don't show you curved lines.
As we zoom out to look at the larger scope of things, once we verify that, we're able to zoom out over a large distance. Now, over this screen, at the time, I was like 18 or 19 years old, all right, when I was doing this job. I wasn't thinking about flat earth and any of this other shit. I was still indoctrinated and under the assumption that the earth is a spinning ball. I never thought about flat earth or anything like that, but I always thought it was weird that as I'm looking at this massive radar screen, I always used to think, how come we're looking at this and I can see, like, we're off of the coast of Argentina, for instance, right? Like, how is it that I can see this far out and it's not like over the horizon or curve, because it's so far? Like I said, we use a lot of these other link signals, and they're called links. They go by different names. I can't say the code names. Some of them I forgot. Some of them are, again, this is classified information. I can't give any specifics on these. But some of the links that we use, not only do we speak to the actual ships and track them, but we speak to aircraft 10,000, 20,000, 30 and higher, 30,000 feet and higher is what I'm saying. It's not just a matter that they're 30,000 feet directly. It's not like they're directly above the ship. This is what's interesting, is this aircraft could be 50, 60 miles away and 30,000 feet in the air. So you understand, like, the angle that you have to take to be able to track this aircraft from a ship that's moving on the water? Think about that for a second.
I served on board of a United States 688I fast attack nuclear submarine, and I can personally attest that we never constantly angled down during our submarine deployments. One of our longest transits went from the Gulf of Oman around the southern tip of Africa and back to Connecticut. We were underwater for almost 3 months straight. My job on board as a radioman meant that I spent a lot of time both in the radio room and in the control room. The control room is where they navigate and drive the submarine. I never once, in my 5 years active duty, heard the officer of the deck or the diving officer give the order to consistently change the angle of the submarine to compensate for the curvature of the Earth. The primary task of the diving officer and the helms and plainsman is to maintain the submarine as level as possible while in transit. If the Earth had any measurable curvature, I am certain we would not have been able to make this incredibly long transit without accounting for it.
And then the big one is given after that. Well, GPS auto corrects for it. And that sent me down yet another path. GPS auto corrects for it. If it's a satellite-based system, how is it correcting for spin if it's also spinning over the same body? And why are there large gaps in GPS coverage over large oceanic bodies? Do they just turn them off? It's just not worthwhile? There have been enough aviation accidents at sea, very far from shore, that would say otherwise. And if you gave the American taxpayers, the ones funding these satellites that are supposed to track aircraft, the information that, well, we're just shutting them off because it's not worthwhile, those 3 or 4 jets full of hundreds of passengers just have to use other navigation methods such as dead reckoning, which is basically using a stopwatch and guessing to the next checkpoint, essentially. If you were to tell them that, they would be infuriated. So that could not be the case. Coverage was a problem. Even over large and non-densely populated areas, you would lose GPS coverage, even in jets at times. So this began to unravel the thread of satellites and satellite timing, and the fact that many reels of footage show these satellites being launched by balloon rather than by rockets. How the concept of these rockets doesn't even work to make it past the atmosphere, much less leave something in perfect geosynchronous orbit. I actually had the privilege of working a short time at a satellite manufacturing company in Northern California. Got to see the assembly and participate in the assembly of satellites, space-based satellites, or so they were said. There would be small bottles encased in these structures that were encased by another structure. The small bottles were the fuel cells. These fuel cells were incredibly small, smaller than a diver's tank in most cases, much smaller. And this was supposed to be all the fuel that the craft needed to run and operate, as most are not actually electric. They're becoming electric now. and sustain itself in a perfect orbit by just small bursts from its engine or its propulsion system.
But truth be told, I've been to many countries, done many things, all things aviation. I can say with absolute certainty, and I can attest, the plane does not dip nose down to follow the curvature of the Earth, ever. Matter of fact, most planes have an airfoil that are 3 degrees nose up in straight and level flight. And the reason that is simple. If the nose of the aircraft was at 0 degrees or level flying through the air, then it would porpoise, right? It would be quite violent because some of the air would go over the nose and some of the air would go under the nose. And it would cause that nose to go up and down, which is literally like a porpoise or a dolphin out of water. And that's exactly what would happen. So the wings are designed, when they are level, the nose is 3 degrees nose up.
The fact, proven from multiple points, that there is no Coriolis to the motion of the Earth. And I'm speaking from a pilot's perspective, also an engineer's perspective, because I obtained a degree as an engineer before I went to flight school. So I'm both a pilot and engineer at once. So, number one, there is no rotation of the Earth, proven by the fact that a helicopter pilot can hover the aircraft indefinitely, motionless, above a single point of the Earth. If the Earth were spinning, as soon as that aircraft left the ground, the Earth would spin out from under it. Now, somebody may say that the air of the atmosphere rotates along with the Earth, which is one of the most absurd concepts imaginable, because if that were the case, then all wind would travel with the Earth. There would be no alternating wind currents. When we know that the jet streams fly overhead, clouds move in multiple directions overhead, and a kite flying over the stationary Earth, the fact that a kite flies because of wind passing through, that proves that the Earth does not, that proves that the air does not move in unison with the Earth. Number two, airstrips do not rotate away from a landing aircraft. Anybody who's seen a pilot's view when an aircraft lands, well, the aircraft lands to a motionless airstrip. If the Earth were rotating, the pilot would have to turn to the angle at which the airstrip is rotating away and land at the speed of the airstrip, which is absurd, simply absurd. Airstrips do not rotate away from the aircraft, and on an east to west landing strip, if the aircraft is landing to the west, the airstrips do not land moving towards the airplane. That's insanity. Okay, simply stated.
If the Earth was a spinning ball, it is virtually impossible for a ship to be moving at 25 to 30 knots on this curved spinning ball while tracking an aircraft that's probably going 300 miles per hour, 50 to 100 miles away. Really, I mean, these like P-3 aircrafts were pretty far and 20,000 feet in the air. It's just virtually impossible. It doesn't make sense. Again, at the time, I wasn't thinking like this, but looking back on the information that I had, I'm like, yeah, there's no way. There's no way that was done on a curved Earth. Literally, the only way that could work is if we are on a flat, stationary plane. We're cruising along. The boat is cruising along in the water. Like, think about it in terms of like a large, like, you know, like those backyard swimming pools. Picture the swimming pool filled up, right? And then your ship, you put a little boat on the swimming pool, and then, you know, you put like a little fake aircraft in the air. Now, from that ship, you're able to see the aircraft. It doesn't matter where you are in that pool, you can track that aircraft. If you're on a spinning ball curve, how the hell can you track an aircraft that could be in a position that's 100 to 200 miles away from you, 30,000 feet in the air from a different angle that's around a curve? It's impossible. There's no way that you could, there's no radio frequency that could track that.
I'd like to point out that I see now that I didn't see before is that you have a magnetic compass and you have a gyro on any ship. And I'm not talking about your little Crabberman show fishing boat, what are they, Deadliest Cat. I'm talking about a real deep sea going, unlimited tonnage boat's going to have a gyro. And it is a big, huge box that sits usually behind the bridge or in the chart room. It's a big box and it's basically the gyro compass. Now, if you had two models, I guess, wouldn't you have to have one making the corrections? Because it almost never matches the magnetic almost never matches the gyro. It's very rare that we're steering the same course. And they say it's due to deviation and variation is where you know, like the metals of the ship causes it to differ. And then you have the variation of the magnetic fields over the Earth. I guess they change, you know, true north and magnetic north. But the way I look at it is, man, they got two different machines. One is a machine and one is from God. The way to get around the earth. God's not a dummy. He put the way to get around the earth with the compasses. If back in the day they had motorized vessels that can get them around, they would probably have got around a lot better. But they were at the mercy of the wind. People say, oh, they didn't know their way, or, they were using the stars and stuff, and so I just believe that the two compasses, the gyro compass that's electronic, and then our regular compass is because they are switching the ways, the maps. There's two different ways to get around the earth. You're tricking us.
Here is another flat earth proof that I never noticed while I was on active duty, thanks to years of indoctrination. Periscope observations. When the submarine is at periscope depth and the observer is looking for ships on the horizon, they will start to see masts at about 8 to 9 miles, depending on atmospheric occlusion and sea state. The hull of the ships won't be visible until about 5 miles, depending on atmospheric occlusion and sea state. At 9 miles away, the target should be 26 feet behind the curve, but this isn't what's observed. My final flat earth point on submarines is with regard to the AN/WSN TAC-7 ring laser gyro that is used on board of U.S. Navy submarines. A typical gyroscope, like the ones used on board of an aircraft, is a device used for measuring or maintaining orientation and angular velocity. It is either a spinning wheel or disc with a counterweight, in which the axis of rotation is free to assume any orientation by itself. When rotating, the orientation of this axis is unaffected by tilting or rotation of the mounting, according to the conservation of angular momentum. However, a ring laser gyro doesn't have any established weight. They use light as a point of reference. It spins up a disc that shoots out lasers, and it has a digital encoder that deciphers where the laser strikes inside of the gimbal system. No make-believe gravity required.
Let's just say we're like 30 miles away. These missiles can shoot much further than that. I can't give you the exact number, but say we're 30 miles away, okay? 30 miles is far. So from our ship, we can track on our we have like a missile projectile. It's like a radar, but it's a little bit different. It's specifically designed to track the missiles. You and actually input the coordinates, latitude and longitude of where you want the missile to strike. Really, really high precision accuracy. Really accurate. We hit that launch and the missile, and it will hit that target 30 miles away, even longer than that. Now, here's the thing. Again, that's not possible on a curved Earth. These missiles are huge. 50 caliber project that are carrying massive amounts of explosives in them, okay? Each one of these missiles are probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So whenever you're lining up these missiles to shoot at targets that are 30 plus miles away, if the Earth is spinning, again, now think about this. We're not sitting like on land holding a gun, all right? So picture this. We're on a ship, like actually in the middle of the water, okay? And the missile is shooting off of the bow of the ship. So if the world is a spinning ball and we're on this curved Earth with water and we're spinning 600 miles per hour through infinite space, I'm pretty sure that it would be physically like it wouldn't even make any kind of sense on a physics type level to be able to shoot a missile from a spot in the water on a spinning ball to pinpoint accurately hit another spot.
And at night, we were going on one ship, on a military ship, and this is with night vision goggles, 50 miles, and these guys were on the bow. They were not even on the bridge, where you'd be 100 foot up. They were on the bow, which is barely probably 40 feet off the water's edge. So these guys, and they have the latest state-of-the-art. This was in 2015. 2015, they had state-of-the-art, what do they call them, night vision goggles. So these things are capable of seeing that far if we live on a plane. You can't deny it. It's so obvious, but not to everyone else. I guess the programming's harder than other people. So they don't want to hear it. But over the years, I have learned the model. I know the model like the back of my hand. I can show proofs. I have ammo now. So when I go out there and I tell somebody, hey, that's impossible, you know, and I'm talking to a third mate or a second mate who's an officer who went to college, meaning they paid for their education. Because when you pay for your education and you're making a handsome salary on it, you can't be wrong. How could I be wrong? I'm making a salary, they're paying me, I paid for this career, everything's working great in my life. You are obviously wrong. All the math works. So with that, you know, it's hard. But when you stump them and you start showing them stuff, it's hard for them to say. And then they start saying stuff like, oh, well, what does it matter anyways? I don't care.
And there is the 8 inches per mile squared. But you guys can't look at it three-dimensionally. It is two-dimensional. It is the amount of deviation that's required for you to come back inward. If you are walking east from north, meaning you are going around north equidistantly, and you walked in a straight line east 1 mile, you're going to have to deviate 8 inches back to the left to get back on the equator, right? Look at it on the flat earth map, and clearly it makes sense. If you walked 1 mile in a straight line east, you have to deviate 8 inches after each mile to stay on the equator. The 8 inches per mile squared is a real measurement.